Chapter 15, Eye of the Beholder. Your reviews help shape this fic. A lot of people asked for more family interaction between Snape, Voldemort, and Harry, so here it is. Harry signed his name to his completed Transfiguration essay with a flourish. For the first time in his Hogwarts career, he was satisfied with his summer homework. Over the last few weeks he had attended class each day. Voldemort apparently didn't believe in weekends, with the sole exception of his birthday. Eddie had given him a book that actually explained how to write an essay. Harry had been shocked that someone had written such a thing ... and that Hermione hadn't suggested it earlier. He'd always assumed some people just knew how to write essays, and everyone else sort of bumbled along, armed with this power of the topic outline and the thesis statement. He'd written essays he was actually proud of. Eddie was pretty uptight about academic integrity, which had proved initially frustrating. He refused to just tell Harry what to write, unlike Hermione, after he and Ron had pestered her. Anyway, Harry had to admit, though, he was learning a lot more when he figured things out for himself. Their study sessions had fallen into a pattern: a group discussion or practical about a subject, followed by work on summer homework. With Eddie's help, Harry would be joining Professor Glyph's Ancient Runes class this year, assuming he passed the entrance exam. Arithmancy was a bit stickier, but Harry was confident he'd be able to take that OWL in a year or two. He and Draco were getting along quite well, actually, especially now that Pansy had left the study group. He wasn't quite sure why, but he didn't really care enough to push. He was just relieved she was gone. All that girliness combined with slithering cunning was just creepy. He gently rolled the scroll and slid it into the scroll case he'd found among his fancy new school supplies. Only his potions assignment remained. Under his usual study habits, his first draft would have been his last. Now, thanks to plentiful resources, and a lack of chores to occupy his time, Harry was on his fourth draft. After the hours spent in studying and discussing with Eddie and Draco, potions made a lot more sense. Though he still had no intention of pursuing new-level potions, he fully intended to get a respectable E on his OWL. Harry started violently when a pallid hand lifted the scroll case from his hands and removed completed essay. Voldemort read the 6-foot scroll with a speed that amazed Harry. "Well done, Harry." Including an overview and discussion of the laws that govern animagi shows commendable thoroughness. "I want to learn how," Harry stated, with a touch of defiance. Like my dad hung in the air between them, at least for Harry. Of course, at one time, it was expected that any witch or wizard who could complete the transformation do so. An animal form is a powerful physical embodiment of one facet of our magic. That is why such transformations appear so often in Muggle folktales. "Why do so few people do it now?" Harry asked. He often found himself drawn into conversation with the Dark Lord in spite of his firm resolution to ignore him as much as possible. The man was a genius, and seemed eager to share his wealth of knowledge with Harry. For centuries, the magical world has been ruled by the most powerful among us. With the establishment of the Ministry of Magic, the less powerful became able to dictate to their betters because of their sheer numbers. The ministry took the Wizengamit's traditional position as makers of policy. A powerful tide of pro-Muggle and pro-Muggle-born feeling was also sweeping the wizarding world at this time. The Animagi discipline is difficult and limited to wizards of above-average magical power and ability. Perhaps 3/5 of Hogwarts graduations have the potential. Keep in mind that Hogwarts graduates make up approximately 1/10 of magical Britain's population. "That's all?" Harry exclaimed. "Most learn at home with their parents until they find a trade. Economics remains the same, Muggle or magical. The vast majority are employed in providing the goods and services needed on a daily basis. Great Britain only needs a few gifted ward builders, for example, but many house builders and repairmen." "So, Animagi?" Harry prodded, far more interested in that than economics. "Wizards and witches capable of the greater magics, such as bonding with a familiar or the animagus transformation, are frightening to the less gifted. They are a step beyond the ordinary wizard, as wizards are a step beyond Muggles and Muggles are a step beyond apes." Thus, the fear of the less gifted became policy, and the greater gifts taboo. Albus Dumbledore himself refers to his familiar as a friend, so as not to discomfit the rabble. Harry privately thought that the comparison to apes was a bit arrogant, but had learned to sift through Voldemort's speeches for the priceless bits of wisdom they contained. Enough for now, the Dark Lord said. "Time for a swimming lesson." "I'd forgotten how big she is," Harry thought, eyeing Nagini uneasily. The enormous serpent was happily sunning herself. Voldemort sat on the edge of the pool, his pale feet and the hem of his robe trailing in the water. Harry spread his arms and inhaled the fresh air. He hadn't been outside in weeks. Harry had followed Voldemort through what felt like miles of rough-hewn tunnels. They'd emerged from a rough crack in the rock onto the bank of a river where it emerged from some deep underground bed. Magic had shaped a pool from the rock, smoothing the stone and sculpting steps and benches. A tiny stream, diverted from the mighty river, fed the pool. The water was nearly perfectly still, and very clear. Harry could see the sandy bottom, flecked with mica or some other shiny mineral. Voldemort gestured at the water. "Well then, swim." "I don't feel like it," Harry muttered sullenly. He was not in the mood from this grandfatherly crap from his parents' murderer today. He really wasn't. The fact that he had nearly drowned when Dudley had pushed him into Murky Pond when he was 5 had nothing to do with it. Voldemort heaved a martyred sigh. "Harry, I have spent a great deal of time and a small fortune acquiring, sheltering, and educating you. I will not have you perish if you should fall into some garden pond or rain barrel." "You mean kidnapping, imprisoning, and brainwashing me, right?" Harry sneered. Voldemort raised one hairless brow at Harry's defiance, and waved his wand. Harry's eyes involuntarily clenched shut as he braced himself for a curse, only to feel a sudden blast of balmy air. Harry yelped, hands instinctively covering his now bare privates. Hunched over defensively and flushed beet red, Harry scowled at Voldemort. The Dark Lord was taking the opportunity to apprise himself of his heir's health. The boy was much improved, healthy and well-muscled, thanks to potion-laced food and his lessons with Severus. Though the imposing height he'd managed to breed into both Severus and Lilith was probably a casualty of years of malnutrition, or inferior Potter genes. More than a little creeped out by the Dark Lord's appraising stare, Harry scrambled into the chill pool, sinking until only his head and clutching hands were visible over the rim. "We will start with the breaststroke," Voldemort announced, seemingly oblivious to Harry's extreme humiliation. He waved his wand at Harry again, and the boy found his body jerking into an unfamiliar series of motions. Under Voldemort's direction, Harry's body swam itself back and forth across the pool. "Quit it, you Scaliac!" Harry coughed up the water he'd inhaled. He panicked, flailing wildly as he tried to catch his breath and keep his head above water. A heavy, solid mass rose up under him, gently lifting him. Exhausted from the unaccustomed activity, he clutched at the mass as he gasped and shivered. "A section safe now, little one, a section," his perch hissed. Harry shrieked when he realized he was resting on Nagini's massive head. The immense snake glided through the water and gently deposited him next to Voldemort. Harry clambered onto the shore. Exhausted, he huddled on the rock, drawing his knees to his chest to hide his nakedness as best he could. "Any difficulty becomes worse if you allow yourself to panic," Voldemort noted, and Harry shot him a filthy look. The man waved his wand, and soft blanket, toast-high warm as though straight from a Muggle dryer, wrapped around Harry. "Catch your breath, then we'll try again. You shouldn't need my guidance this time." Willfully misinterpreting Harry's incredulous look, he added, "Nagini will be ready to assist you, should you need it." Several hours later, Harry was hungrily devouring a bowl of soup and slices of toasted baguette topped with mild melted cheddar. Harry had stoically endured his swim lesson. Nagini's presence made him think of Jaws, adding to his discomfort with the whole thing. Voldemort's helpful advice and encouraging commentary made the experience quite surreal. Though, Harry reflected, he looked more normal in that rough, wild place than in the luxurious rooms of the Slytherin house. Wistfully thinking of watching the Weasley brothers laugh and dunk each other in their muddy garden pond. "Even my swim lessons are freakish." Harry felt very homesick. To distract himself, he asked, "So, do all Slytherins lock up their heirs?" "'Cause that room is an awfully convenient prison. It could really use a window or a door," he said pointedly. "Traditionally, that room is reserved for hostages." "Hostages?" Harry squeaked, thinking of terrorists hijacking planes. It was a common practice for feuding families to exchange younger sons or daughters to help ensure peace. Such children were treated well, clothed and educated as befit their station, but their lives were forfeit should the peace treaty be violated. Suddenly, Harry's cozy room, of which he'd become quite fond — he'd never had his own room before — seemed frightening and depressing. Seeing Harry's misery, Voldemort added, "In my research into our family history, I've yet to find an incident where that actually occurred. In fact, quite a few hostages ended up marrying into the family." Harry let out a relieved breath. No condemned children had been dragged from that room to their deaths. He sipped his tea, wishing for pumpkin juice. It always comforted him. "Something wrong with your tea, Harry?" Voldemort inquired solicitously. Inwardly, he crowed over his victory. Harry had accepted his comfort and assurances. It's fine. I just miss pumpkin juice, that's all." Voldemort looked surprised. "I've never understood how anyone could miss that vile stuff. I was allergic to it, myself." "Allergic?" He nodded. "I spent my first weeks at Hogwarts visiting Madame Celia. That dreadful concoction gave me hives." He sipped his own tea. "I'll have the house elves make you some." "Thank you, sir," Harry said politely. He was too tired to mouth off. "Why are your house elves so different, anyway?" "Their buns are very different than those of most house elves. They swore into House Slytherin, rather than enslaved to it. Thus, they serve us as their own honor and consciences dictate. In fact, one of our ancestors developed a terrible addiction to opium, and the house elves confiscated his wand and imprisoned him for over a year until he overcame his need for the drug." Harry rather thought Sesfi was more than capable of taking such action. Voldemort continued, "Though there is no direct evidence, I believe that centuries spent immersed in the unique power that infuses this place has altered our elves." "Can they speak English?" Harry asked. He'd never heard Sesfi speak anything but Parseltongue. "Most of them can, and all of them can understand it. Only a handful have become changed enough to speak Parseltongue. I believe that these few are among the oldest, but the house elves will not confirm or deny that. But only Parselmouths are served by these unusual elves." "So that's why you assigned Sesfi to me?" Voldemort laughed one of his soft, hissing laughs. "Oh, no, child. She picked you. We get no say in the matter. Now, tuck in your shirt. Perfect. You look wonderful, dear," the mirror said cheerfully. Despite Harry's initial wariness, the mirror had turned out to be quite helpful and kind. She had a female voice, at least it had an encyclopedic knowledge of fabric, fashion, and grooming. Under her direction, Harry felt quite dashing. Voldemort had temporarily yielded on the more conservative robes, on the condition that Harry faithfully practiced posture and carriage with civility. After the last month, Harry could swirl a cloak with the best of them. Harry followed Sesfi to an enormous potions lab tucked into the dungeons. A tapestry of the periodic table of elements hung from a wall, and a gold cauldron big enough to bathe in took up a corner of the room. Racks of knives, jars of ingredients, and tables with a variety of surfaces took up the room. Snape was bent over a shallow bowl on one of the tables. Murmuring softly, he ran one stained finger over the book he was reading, then turned and examined the potion again. Giving a satisfied nod, he draped a clean cloth over the bowl, then turned. "Hello, Harry. How were your lessons?" "Pretty good, sir. I think I'll be able to join Professor Glyph's class this year." Snape's long fingers moved restlessly over the ingredients on the table, a move that Harry would have called fidgeting in anybody else. "Your fencing lessons are progressing well." Harry smiled at the compliment. "Thank you, sir. I really appreciate you taking the time to teach me. I understand you are learning to swim as well." Harry shifted uneasily, but nodded. "Yes, sir." Snape began to ask another question, then looked at something behind Harry. His lips pursed in a thin line. "How goes the brewing, Severus?" the Dark Lord asked. Harry frowned, wondering why Voldemort called him Severus and not Snape. "It only requires a few more ingredients, my lord," Snape said. Both of the adults looked at Harry, who began to feel a bit trapped. Ingredients," he squeaked, backing away nervously. "Have you seen Muggle corrective eye lenses, Harry?" Snape asked. "You mean contacts?" Snape frowned. "I suppose ... A flexible lens that fits directly on the eye?" Harry nodded. "This potion," Snape gestured at the covered bowl, "will act in the same fashion. A drop in each eye will grant perfect eyesight for several hours." Harry peered at the bowl, excited. Really? The bowl was actually shaped like a contact lens, Harry realized. "Yes. I'll need some of your tears to complete the potion. Like Erudition Memoria, it is unique to you." He handed Harry a small, corked bottle. "Sniff the contents. It will encourage tear production." Harry worked out the cork and took a deep sniff. His eyes burned as though he was chomping an onion, and tears poured down his face. Something cool and metal rested against each cheek, catching the tears. The burning sensation eased away, and Snape handed him a handkerchief. Blowing his running nose, Harry watched as Snape carefully measured a small spoonful of his tears into the shallow bowl, and bottled the rest. He sprinkled a rosy powder over the potion, and nodded, again covering it. "A few more hours, and it will be finished," Voldemort said. "I've acquired an Owl Order catalog for you, Harry. Severus will be brewing lenses for your spectacles as well, and you will need new frames." "Brew lenses?" Harry said. Snape nodded. "I will use the remainder of your tears to brew several potions, which will be poured into the frames you choose. The potion will solidify and become a lens." "Severus is well on his way to becoming an alchemist as well as a potions master," Voldemort said, sounding proud. "What's the difference?" Harry asked, fascinated. "Potions use primarily organic ingredients and are meant to be consumed, usually orally or topically. Alchemy uses primarily inorganic ingredients and produces objects," Snape said. "The lenses I will make for your spectacles will be nearly indestructible. They will also help you to see more clearly at night and underwater, and darken in bright sunlight." "Will my contacts do that too?" "Unfortunately not. That potion temporarily changes the shape of your eye itself. Your spectacles merely change the light before your eyes receive it." Grinning excitedly, Harry began to flip through the catalog. The first few pages were ordinary frames, though usually made from wood instead of plastic. Harry studied a flowery pear that came in a riot of colors. After a few moments, the image shifted into a mirror, showing Harry wearing the spectacles. Eagerly, Harry tore through the catalog, moving quickly once he realized that touching an image would trigger the magic. Bemused, Severus and Voldemort watched Parade of Styles flicker by. Harry, oblivious to the illusory pink flamingo spectacles now adorning his face, glanced up, wondering at the strange expressions on the faces of the two adults, shrugged and continued. In the end, Harry chose a simple-looking style with oval frames. According to the advert, they were charmed to fit comfortably and remain on the wearer's face in all conditions. Chapter 16, Tea and Cat Food Animagus Forms. What should Harry's be, and why? What is Snape's, and why? Your answers will help me shape this fic. How things change, Severus mused. In the past, the Death Eaters had reserved their talk of all things familial for their meetings away from their lord's presence. Now, the Dark Lord was deliberately hosting an informal afternoon tea for the Malfoys in order to discuss their children. Or, in all actuality, his heir and the child with whom he was on the friendliest terms. Though the Dark Lord's treachery still filled Severus with cold fury, he did appreciate the fact that the man included him on these sorts of meetings, allowing him a parent's eye view of Harry's development. Of course, Severus was very aware that any say he had in Harry's life was entirely illusory, but making something from nothing was the hallmark of a skilled potion master. "So, Lord Slytherin, have you finished Lord Potter's school shopping yet?" Narcissa asked. Voldemort nodded, hiding his discomfiture. Social time with his liege men had been spent discussing strategy and politics. Now he was holding a delicate flowered teacup, discussing children and shopping and school supplies. "Perhaps I could look over your purchases, to make sure you haven't forgotten anything?" she offered politely. Lucius looked scandalized. Perversely amused, Severus said, "Mrs. Malfoy has been seeing to Draco's supplies for 4 years, my lord. His clothing, books, and class materials are always in order and of good quality." Actually, Severus had no idea if this were true. He just wanted to watch Narcissa tear her way through the stack of Owl Order catalogs on the Dark Lord's desk. Voldemort, oblivious to his danger, nodded agreeably and whispered to his house elf. The creature retrieved over a dozen catalogs and small stack of receipts. After noting all of Voldemort's purchases on a scroll, she eagerly began flipping through the catalogs. "Green snakeskin patterned pajamas, my lord? That won't do. He'll be shunned by his house," she tutted disapprovingly. "Oh, look at these. Red with golden snitches. How darling." She ticked the box next the pajamas with her quill. "I got Draco a green pair, and he adores them. I've had to replace them every semester, they're always worn out by then. Oh, they come in blue as well. The galvanized steel trunk is far too clunky. Now, this inlaid cedar quite lovely, long-lasting, and it will help protect his garments. It comes with charms to keep out the damp, as well. And 57 hidden compartments. Boys love their little secrets. We'll put some surprises in a few of them. Spectacles. I assume Severus is to brew the frames? He'll need a pair for summer and winter, and one to match his formal robes, and some top-notch Quidditch goggles. This wand holster is excellent for casual wear, but he needs one to wear with his formal robes. No, this one would spoil the lines. For over an hour, Narcissa chatted and filled out order forms. Harry needed monogrammed vials for his potions, including blown glass, crystal, and ceramic, multiple formal robes, with appropriate accessories, a broom case, a small portable WWN radio, a total of 3 trunks, one each for unseasonal and seasonal clothing and one for miscellaneous storage, 24 pairs of footwear. Finally, looking satisfied, she handed Voldemort the completed forms and advised, "You may want to send those off right away. Some of those orders take a bit of time to fill." Voldemort quickly added the necessary signatures, and sent the house off to all the orders. Lucius looked a bit dumbfounded. No wonder the 1st of September is such an ordeal. He avoided his wife's steely glare and poured himself more tea. Father and son sat in silence for long moments after the Malfoys flew home. "I had not anticipated such mothering," the Dark Lord finally said. Severus nodded his agreement. Deciding that the Dark Lord was in a reasonably sociable mood, Severus asked, "If you intended to make Harry your heir, why the whole Triwizard?" He gestured vaguely, searching for the right word. The corner of Voldemort's mouth twitched into a small, satisfied smile. "I was wondering when you would ask me that." After Harry's second year, the snakes carried the news of a speaker to me. I realized then that Lilith had indeed bred true, despite her husband. I hadn't yet realized how truly unique Harry was. My intention was never to kill Harry, it was to use the tournament as a proving ground, to demonstrate his worth to my followers. I must admit, I was shocked when he dueled with me. I had intended for him to use the cup and escape. He sighed. Gryffindors. The Dark Lord measured a few drops of Nagini's venom from a vial into his tea. Even I was impressed with his courage and endurance. So, I seized the opportunity for a little initiation. He endured the Cruciatus better than many of my followers. Very few grown men can endure such pain so well, and him a mere boy. Severus looked at his father with a mixture of awe and horror. Harry's torture had been a carefully calculated move in his eternal power struggle. It had certainly succeeded. Even Lucius was impressed. Severus closed his eyes, finding himself grateful for Voldemort's adoption of Harry as his heir. At least he would never have to hear again of his father torturing his son. Harry burrowed his head back under his pillow to escape the cheerful morning sunlight. He was just beginning to drift back into a strange but pleasant dream in which he and Buckbeak had a chocolate frog delivery service when the notion of sunlight filtered through his hazy mind. Harry clambered out of bed, cramming his spectacles onto his face as he headed for the blurry rectangle of light. It wasn't a true window, instead, a section of the wall had become porous, like a sponge or a piece of Swiss cheese. Holes varying from an inch to half an inch in diameter had appeared in the stone. Harry pressed his face against his new window, inhaling the fresh air. He could make out the glint of a large body of water to the left and neat squares of farmed land edged by a forest as intriguing as the forbidden forest to the right. White feathers obscured his vision. "Hedwig!" he shouted gleefully, worming one finger through a hole to pet his owl. Hedwig gently nibbled the fingertip that touched her, then pressed one bright eye to one of the larger openings to study Harry. She hooted, and pointedly held out her leg. Harry bolted for his desk and began writing. His letter was somewhat ragged by the time he managed to stuff it through, and Hedwig had managed to rip a sizable tear in the parchment when she tried to help. Getting a secure grip on the letter, she gave him an encouraged hoot and lifted off. "A letter." "Hedwig brought us a letter," Sirius shrieked, running through the narrow corridors of Grimmauld Place, the tattered scroll held aloft like the Olympic torch. He burst into Remus' small room, and tore the scroll open. "Dear Sirius, it's Harry. I'm okay, don't worry about me. And tell Amelia Bones to keep an eye out for Wormtail. This is very important. I've been kidnapped by Lord Voldemort. Don't panic, he's made me his heir, which means he can't hurt me. How's this for pathetic? This is the best summer I've ever had." I think he told my aunt his car was broken. He was polyjuiced to look like a regular guy. Then he petrified me and apparated us to his house. I think it's Slytherin Castle. or something. He had a little party and he introduced me to a bunch of Death Eaters, but for some reason I can't write down any of their names. Maybe the presents they brought will help you figure it out. Some chunks of a bluish metal, a really fancy violin with phoenix feathers and singing tree wood. It was a big deal. A really awful magical painting with snakes eating lions, badgers, and eagles. Some shrunken muggle heads, a bunch of potions ingredients, some ugly gray fabric that everybody was impressed with, jewelry with emeralds and snakes. That's all I can remember. Voldemort has me going to school every day with 5 other 5th years and 1 6th year. He's teaching me to swim and I have a teacher for fencing and etiquette. My room is facing sort of east, and I have a river or a lake on left, north, and farmlands and forest to my right. South? Voldemort said some stuff about my mum, but I don't believe him. He says if I study hard and behave, he'll send me back to Hogwarts. Be very careful. I love you, Harry. Hedwig drank some water from the kitchen tap while Crookshanks generously tipped the ceramic jar full of cat food onto the floor. It wasn't as good as owl treats, but it was food. Hedwig explained that the snake man had taken her boy and was keeping him in his big stone nest. Her boy's private nest was the nicest he'd ever had. Crookshanks was confused why the snake man would go to so much trouble. Her boy was the hatchling of the snake man's hatchling, the owl told him. Crookshanks licked his shoulder while he thought, why didn't the silent man take care of his own kitten? Hedwig agreed that it was very strange. Harry was barely into his fledgling stage, and in need of guidance from his father. Crookshanks himself had fathered dozens of kittens with both Kneazle and mundane queens. Toms, of course, didn't stick around to rear the kittens, but he'd often left impressive gifts of dead squirrels and rats near the homes of his various mating partners. Hedwig hooted disdainfully at this evidence of Crookshanks' irresponsibility and promiscuity. Crookshanks didn't like the feather duster's attitude. Hermione was roused from her essay by terrible noises issuing from the kitchen. Throwing open the door, she found Crookshanks yowling at Hedwig. The owl was making a disturbing hissing noise and beating her wings. Hermione seized a spoon and gave Crookshanks a smack, then gave Hedwig a sharp rap across her talons. Bad Crookshanks, bad Hedwig. The two were startled out of their aggressive stances and gave her disdainful looks. Hedwig fluttered to the floor and began picking pieces of Crookshanks' cat food from amidst the shards of the crockery that used to be a jar. Dumbledore read over the letter again, after checking its authenticity with several charms. Best summer he's ever had, Sirius needled. Considering his host is the Dark Lord who murdered his parents and tortured him, why, imagine how awful those muggles must have been. Who knew? Apparently, Sirius had absorbed a few lessons on bitter sarcasm from Snape. Let's focus on the matter at hand, Remus said tactfully. What about sending him a portkey? Dumbledore shook his head. Severus and I discussed this option. The Slytherin family wards are unparalleled masterpieces. They will alert the Lord to any portkeys with unfamiliar magical signatures. And if the wards react by torching Hedwig, Harry would never forgive us, Sirius said.